Joining me on UpFront are Diana Buttu, Ramallah-based lawyer and former legal advisor to the Palestine Liberation Organization, and Noura Erakat. She is a human rights attorney and associate professor at Rutgers University. Her latest book is titled Justice for Some: Law and the Question of Palestine. Thank you both for joining me on UpFront. Diana, I'm going to start with you. 2022 was the deadliest year for Palestinians in the occupied West Bank in nearly 2 decades. And now, with the latest round of violence, this year is on track to surpass that. January 26th saw one of the highest daily death tolls in years when Israeli forces raided a refugee camp in Jenin, killing at least 9 people. The following day, a 21-year-old Palestinian killed 7 Israelis near a synagogue in East Jerusalem. You're on the ground in Ramallah. What do you think is driving the latest wave of violence?
Because they can. It's been years of the United States and other countries around the world coddling Israel, telling Israel that it can do whatever it wants, that there are no red lines. And inside Israeli society itself, it views that it's okay for them to be able to kill Palestinians. This is why we see not only the death toll rising, but we see the daily aggression against Palestinians. These are numbers that are never reported. People who are dying because of lack of medical treatment, people whose homes are being demolished, whose land is being taken. This is part of the daily violence that Palestinians live under because of Israel. And it's because Israel can, and because there's nobody who is effectively stopping Israel or saying to Israel that there are red lines. So this is why we see what we see. And I wouldn't be surprised if we surpass that 2022 figure very soon, because of the fact that this is not only they've been given the green light, but this is now also a right-wing government that has also put Palestinians literally in their crosshairs.
I'm glad you mentioned this right-wing government. Noura, Benjamin Netanyahu has returned as prime minister, even though he's left office facing a corruption scandal. And in fact, even today, he's still facing corruption charges. It would seem like Netanyahu had a strategy of forging strategic alliances with the far right, in order to come back into power. But since the new government took office in December, the Israeli public has opposed many of his policies, such as the recent move to weaken the country's Supreme Court. And abroad, several of Israel's closest allies have expressed concerns about the recent moves by far-right figures appointed to the highest level positions in the Israeli government. Was it strategic on the part of Netanyahu to empower the extreme right to regain his position?
I think, as goes with most politicians, the idea is self-preservation, even if it means scorched earth for everyone else. I think we should be most concerned about is the way that the international community is responding to Netanyahu in a way that has rehabilitated him, in contrast to the moment where he was viewed very clearly as being in alignment with a racially supremacist movement and a neoliberal order, in alignment with the Trump administration, at which point we plainly understood him to be bad. Now, what I also want to point out is, as with many things concerning U.S. Mideast policy and Israel, that there is much continuity as there is rupture in this situation. What we see in terms of the rise of the far right and what is the most fascist government that Israel has seen is not necessarily new vis-a-vis Palestinians and an eliminatory policy regarding them, a very violent policy that marks them for removal in order to settle Jewish Zionists in their place. But in this case, what the Israeli government has done in this iteration is to combine and marry religiosity to this fascist regime. And that is what most Israelis are objecting to. And that is the panic.
Can you explain that when you say attach religiosity to it? Can you explain that for the audience, what you mean?
Sure. So historically, this fascist edge of Zionism, which has targeted Palestinians for removal in order to establish uncontested Zionist settler sovereignty, was secular in nature, so that it was nationalized Judaism juridically or legally, so that you can be a Jewish national distinct from being an Israeli citizen. In this situation, the far-right government wants to establish a more robust theocracy that targets the LGBTQ community that wants to expand its holding of Palestinians' land within the language of religion, that wants to emulate, right, the story, Jewish biblical stories of the annihilation of Palestinians in order to manifest that. And so the protests that we see amongst Israelis is less to do with the concern for Palestinians or how this is a heightened crisis, but more of an internal concern of what this looks like for them. And I think that the escalation against Palestinians is another political maneuver that is used to deflect attention away from what is this domestic turmoil in order to focus on this constructed threat of the Palestinian.
Netanyahu appointed Itamar Ben-Gvir as Minister of National Security. Now, this is a guy who was convicted of inciting racism and for supporting an anti-Arab movement outlawed as a terrorist organization. In the last election, the Religious Zionism Bloc, which encompasses Ben-Gvir's Otzema Yehudit, or Jewish Power Party, made significant gains. They won 14 seats in the Knesset. What does it say about where the Netanyahu government is when it's taking an extremist leader of a fringe party and putting him in a key cabinet position?
Well, it's not just Itamar Ben-Gvir, it's also all of the individuals who are in that political party. Actually, there's a couple of three parties that came together. Another individual is a man named Smotrich. Smotrich is the current Minister of Finance. He's a person who has very proudly, in his words, called himself a fascist homophobe. Again, these are his words, not mine. And this is an individual who himself has been at the forefront of trying to push for the demolition of Palestinian homes and the wholesale ethnic cleansing of some Palestinian towns in the West Bank. And so you have him combined with Itamar Ben-Gvir, who himself, again, who says that he is a follower of Meir Kahane, who at one point in time dressed up as Baruch Goldstein, who's a mass murderer, a man who killed 29 Palestinians as they were praying at the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron. He dressed up as him for Purim and said that he was dressing up as him because he is his hero.
Wow.
So it begs exactly. So it begs the question, why would Netanyahu go into government with these people? And it's because Netanyahu is no different. And I think we make a big mistake if we somehow just say that it's these three individuals or that one political party that has been pushing for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, when what we know is that this has been Israel's policy since 1948 and even before that. And it's just a question of whether they're more upfront about it or less upfront about it. And during the election campaign, Ben-Gvir used to walk around and say, we need to show Palestinians who is the master of the house. And so this is where Israelis are. People who voted for him, they either voted for him because they support his message, or they voted for him because they willfully ignore his message. In either case, the result for Palestinians is deadly.
Noura, does the new Israeli government or the shift from one party to another have any practical bearing on the lives of Palestinian people? I'm thinking specifically about something that Diana said, where she said there's no left wing in Israel, and that there hasn't been for a while. If it's Likud in charge, if it's the Labor Party in charge, or if it's the Meretz Party, which at least self-describes as leftist, do any of those formations change the facts on the ground for Palestinians?
I think it's right to ask that question because, again, the international community is responding to this far-right government because of the crisis that it poses for Israel as it's emerging and consolidating itself as a theocracy. And therefore, it's threatening a democracy. But there is no democracy when it defines itself as a Jewish state. It cannot be a democracy when Palestinian citizens of the state are treated as a fifth pillar, when all the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza are denied the right to vote. This is not a democracy under any situation for Palestinians, and under all iterations, they are targeted for removal. They are killed with ease. They are racialized as always already a threat, a security threat. They are regarded as terrorists and can be killed and assumed guilty until proven innocent. And the fact that they can be killed with this greater ease, and we've taken Zionism to its most extreme logic, and still seen that the media discourse has not changed, and still seen that the international community has not responded with sanctions on Israel, but instead there have been rewards. There's a clear irony here that rather than be punished, they are somehow being rewarded and coddled, which is an extreme moment for Palestinians to realize, well, at what point, at how much must they suffer in order to signal a clear shift in the international community? And as this extreme government demonstrates, that line is not apparent and is not clear, and the price that Palestinians will pay will continue to be far too high, immoral, and clearly illegal.
Diana, given everything that we've discussed, everything that Palestinians are facing with the new government, with the threats of violence, with everything going on in the global community, what do you think is the next chapter for Palestinians, and do you have hope?
Oh, it's hard to have hope. And I'm a person who always does. And the reason it's hard for me to have hope is because as much as I am hopeful and proud and happy that I see the boycott movement taking off and people really understanding what Israel's doing, at the same time, I live a different reality, a reality in which at any moment, I, my family, my friends can be killed. I think back to last year of May of 2022, during not just during the year, but during May, when a friend of mine, a journalist, Jenin was killed. She was gunned down, and her death has probably been the most investigated death I've ever seen. And yet here we are, we're coming up close on the 1-year anniversary of Jenin's murder, and nobody has been held to account. So while I am hopeful and I really am happy of all of the work that people are doing around the globe to push to hold Israel to account, at the same time, I'm very acutely aware that the pressure that's being exerted on Israel is not strong enough, and change is not happening quickly enough. And it's that fear that you live in, both the fear that at any point in time you can be killed or injured or whatever it is, but also the fear that it's going to be lasting for generations to come, that leaves me with a sense that where are we? Where are we? How has this been allowed to fester for so long? Why is it that Israeli youth are shifting even further to the right? Whereas if you look globally, they're shifting to the left. They have progressive values. Why is this the case? And I firmly believe it's because of the fact that Israel has been allowed to get away with literally murder.
Diana Buttu, Noura Erakat, thank you so much for joining me on UpFront.